And we are live for episode 131 of Trek Live. Welcome if you're here watching us as we're doing this. If you're seeing us through the Twitter stream, like if you're stumbling onto my timeline or you're watching it just on the Twitter screen for some reason, you can click the Periscope link and open a new window. It'll take you to our actual live stream, and there's commenting abilities there. You can actually participate if you log in with your Twitter account. Twitter and Periscope are simpatico, they're a shared entity. So you're logging information on Twitter. If you have a Twitter handle, you can log into Periscope and comment and be an active participant in live streams. So we welcome you to do that. If you're watching this currently live, or if you're just stumbling into this and you want to check us out later down the road, that's some new information for maybe some who are finding us either for the first time or trying to figure out how to do this whole thing, because it's new for us, and I'm sure new for anybody else out there too. So welcome again. How you doing this morning, Dan?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm really excited to talk some Deep Space Nine. Back to the Periscope thing real quick. Just part of what Trek Live is all about is including you guys in the conversation, and that's how we do that. So we'd love to hear from you in chat to join the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. We're a live show for a reason. We could record this and just post it on YouTube or a traditional podcast, but we like the idea of being live so that people can stumble in by accident and kind of take the show over a little bit and help drive our conversation and send it in unexpected directions. And something simple said in the live stream chat box could steer the whole conversation in a kind of fresh direction that we didn't see coming. And we like that about the live show idea. So anybody's welcome to participate. We'll read your comment and if we can, and certainly respond to it. And like I said, it could help steer our conversation. So everybody's welcome to participate. Everybody's encouraged to make their voice heard and be a part of the show that way.
Yep.
So yeah, like you said, Dan, we're going to be talking DS9 today. This is we do this every so often. We do a little rewatch recap typically at the top of our conversations, regardless of what we're talking about. We'll talk about what we've watched recently for a few minutes. But when we hit the end of seasons, we hit these benchmarks. On occasion, we'll kind of stop, pause, and do a whole episode on a season, and we'll do like a see it, skip it, which we're going to do today for Dan. Dan, see it, skip it for DS9 season 1. And just kind of talk about the season in general, how the show is progressing in our eyes, and whoever's watching it currently. So it'll be more like me kind of asking Dan questions. I certainly have my opinions on season 1, and I have my own thoughts. I haven't seen it in recent weeks, so it's not as fresh for me as it is for Dan. So we're going to let Dan kind of steer the conversation, and it be about his experience with rewatching DS9 this time. But everybody's input is obviously certainly welcome, and it'll inform the conversation, like we said earlier. So really looking forward to doing that. I think we're going to skip the regular rewatch recap because this whole episode is a rewatch recap.
Yes.
I'll just say I'm still in the same place, so there's nothing to update for me anyway. But we have lots to talk about for Dan with DS9 season 1. So we'll just get right into it and see where it goes. Some of these episodes earlier on we've talked about, over the course of previous shows when we've done this, in the intro portion of our episodes. So some of it may be, if you've watched us many times before, we may double back some talking points that we've hit on before, but we're going to talk about the season as a whole, so we're going to touch on pretty much all these episodes as we go through it. But I'm curious, what were your, Deep Space Nine for you? Obviously, it's just your second time watching it, first time in a long time.
Yep.
What are your overall takeaways from the first season?
First season, one of the big takeaways for me was how different not just the show feels to the past other Trek, but how the characters are different. This is not a flagship. These officers aren't career officers. These aren't, straight-laced you know, officers. These people are different. It's not all Starfleet. It's intermixed with, Bajorans, other alien species, shop owners. So there's this is so different. It feels, coming from TOS season 3. It feels almost like a complete 180. So that's probably one of my biggest takeaways. Is this such a different feel of a show and of characters that it's really refreshing coming back to it.
Yeah, it definitely.
I haven't seen it in a long time.
And I feel like that was the that was the big aim for this show at the time. You're coming off of TOS because of the way you're watching the shows, but having this arrive in the midst of season 6 of TNG when it aired, I think it was a clear. There's a definite effort made to step in a fresh direction and do some different things and set a different tone. Like you said, not on a flagship, not out exploring space on the ship that represents the best of the best necessarily. It's a little bit more ragtag, a little bit more frontier, and clearly being set on a space station was a radical departure for Star Trek. So there was a definite effort made to set a fresh path forward and to have a new take on the Star Trek idea, the concept. So like I think it was certainly controversial at the time for those reasons. There was pushback certainly at the time to the change. It's different for us now, watching it, having seen it before and having full context and having other fresh takes along the way as well through Star Trek's history. It's not quite as anomalous as it was in 1993, but yeah.
But just the premise of the show is so radically different as well, right? And it's not a very happy kind of premise or situation that Cisco and Starfleet finds themselves in. But I think, I'm not going to say this happens a lot, but this could be a typical posting, maybe in other parts of the galaxy. But it's just the premise, coming in after an occupation, trying to rebuild Bajor, trying to rebuild this relationship, not just with the Bajorans and Starfleet, but with the Bajorans and everyone else.
Yeah.
Makes for some really good television. So
for sure. And I think you kind of just, one of the things you just said that really stands out to me, and it stood out to me as a kid even watching it. I feel like Star Trek up until that time, and most other Star Trek along the way, since even Deep Space Nine, is such a we're moving through space, so we're never kind of hovering over the same things. And Deep Space Nine right off the bat is so kind of, obviously because it's a space station staying in one place, it's so entrenched with the Bajorans and the Cardassians and those interspecies dynamics and the political machinations of those cultures and societies are so ingrained into the DNA of this show. That's a radical departure. The idea of Star Trek has always kind of been or has began as we're on a ship, we're moving through space, coming across one adventure after another, and fresh things week to week. That's certainly a very different vibe as well. Yeah, and Rob makes a point that I'm sure we're going to get to in the chat. DS9 season 1 feels more like Voyager and TNG than later seasons of Deep Space Nine. That's yeah. What do you?
That's Star Trek though.
Yeah.
Early TNG felt like TOS. Early any of these shows feels like the predecessor. So I think that I agree, Rob, that it does feel like that, but I think they start to kind of explore some different things that allows the show to find its footing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think tonally there are some real similarities to TNG that are, I think, pretty natural. A lot of the production crew is consistent from TNG. Some of the writers that came from TNG are already on Deep Space Nine. Robert is not running the show yet, but he's a writer, and he had some experience on Next Gen. He's a big influence even now, early on, season 1, DS9. And Michael Pillar's running the show, who ran TNG. So there's definitely some natural consistency there that I think does kind of fall by the wayside a little bit. Deep Space Nine, like a lot of these shows do, finds its own voice kind of along the way and down the road a bit.
Yeah.
But it does shift as time goes on, and I think that common DNA becomes less obvious as time goes on. Yeah. So yeah, I would agree. Penske Files in the room says DS9's greatest strength early on is how antagonistic it is towards TNG. You know, that kind of tension that you feel between Sisko and Picard or early on in Emissary, and I think is really really good. And I think just the concept, I think there's some pushback to trying to be different from TNG. I think the episodes feel similar, but like you said, all the things that we kind of already talked about, there are some very different, aiming points that the Deep Space Nine's setting out for compared to what TNG was trying to do. And its biggest weakness is how much it apes TNG's narrative style. Like it does. It feels coming from the same place. So that I would definitely agree with that. And over time, I think it does shed some of those habits, and it becomes its own thing. So, it's certainly more episodic, as Rob says. Early on, it becomes it doesn't quite have the serialized DNA yet. There's more serialization than I think Next Generation already, just by the nature of staying in one place and having this Bajoran dynamic that never quite leaves. What are you gonna say?
But there is some in kind of season 1.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely. It's there.
We'll talk about. It's there. It's not like at the forefront. Maybe as the later seasons go on, as we see in the later seasons, but it's definitely there.
For sure. So I guess before we get into the see it, skip it, I have some broader questions that I'm curious to ask you. Before we get going, with kind of going episode by episode and looking at the see it's and the skip it's in your mind. Characters that work the best, characters that maybe are a slow start, just general takeaways with how season 1 operates as a launching point for the characters and who gets off running and who maybe stumbles out of the gate.
Stumbles out of the gate. Just the Dax character, I think, is kind of on the back burner. It's interesting because when I think of Deep Space Nine coming into this, it was such a prevalent character. It's just interesting to see it kind of not completely in the background, but taking a step back to the other characters for sure.
Yeah, Dax, I think they definitely, and I think if you read behind the scenes materials and check out Memory Alpha or read the Deep Space Nine Companion, which is it's ginormous, great reference book about just the making of TV. There's so much detail in that. There's a lot of obvious struggle with defining her character and finding the voice, and I think we've talked about before on previous episodes as we've done rewatch recaps, shorter versions with these early episodes, that early Dax feels almost Vulcan-y in her like kind of emotional distance and wiseness and kind of rising above the fray, very kind of cold and very remote, not quite logical, but like very, very. There's some common DNA there with characters like Spock. I
have a headcanon fix.
Sure.
Just watching it, I just think that she just being joined. It takes a little bit to warm up and then find herself. But some other characters that were kind of rocky off start. The Bashir character, definitely rocky for sure. The other characters, I think, do a really good job. Sisko, Odo, Quark. Quark and Odo have such great chemistry right off the bat. I love those two characters together on screen. Kira and Sisko, I like that they have things to work on, which I think kind of plays on the premise of the show that they've got a lot of work to do.
You're kind of watching them build their trust with each other.
Exactly.
They're not simpatico right off the bat. They don't see everything the same way, and they have to kind of work through that through these episodes. There are some issues that come along the way in the form of these episodes that kind of test their relationship, and set the groundwork for what's to come on that level,
Yeah.
which is cool to see for sure. I totally agree with that. I would echo all of that. I would say Bashir and Dax are the two characters that I think they had the hardest time in the first season, and maybe even a little bit into the second for some of them, to really get going with what they're going to be, what their voice is. And I think Cisco, Odo, Quark, Kira, all kind of hit the ground running pretty quickly and bring a lot to the table and really distinctive voices. Cisco gets actually some criticism early on. I think some people view Cisco as like the pre-bald head and goatee version is a little bit more mellow, a little bit more a little more laid back. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I think when I think of early Cisco, I think maybe it's not fair that my brain just kind of goes to Emissary, and I feel like that's such a good portrait of a guy. I just think it's such a good character study of a guy who's kind of in a place he really doesn't want to be and at a crossroads in his life. That kind of powers my opinion of Cisco, and I think it's a good launching point for his character, and I enjoy Cisco from the outset. Some take more time, I think, to really get on board with him, but the characters you named, I couldn't agree more with. And O'Brien, of course, I think pretty much hits the ground running as an existing character that I think he had there's an advantage there in place.
Yeah, a little bit
to get running right away. Yeah. So okay, interesting. And there are some other questions that I'll ask that I think I'll save for the end. I put a poll up on Twitter that we got a lot of responses to that I'm going to ask you. I hope you're prepared to answer if you saw them. That question's coming your way as we move forward. But let's get into the see it, skip it definitions on your part. Okay. Just so there's a graphic going up on the screen now that has Dan's see it, skip it labels on each episode. These are not mine. This is not a shared opinion necessarily. I agree with a lot of it.
What's that tone? Is this...
no tone. It's no. I actually do. I think there's a lot of commonality here. There's a couple little differences, but for the most part, we're on the same page here. And
cool.
I'm interested to kind of go into each one and hear your kind of take. And we're not going to go. I'm not interested in going like one by one straight through. Emissary through In the Hands of the Prophets. I think we're going to treat this kind of like an interview. I'm going to look at this, and what sticks out in my mind, I'm going to ask you about, and we'll kind of eventually make our way through each episode. And anybody out there in the chat, Penske Files in there, and Trekkie Rob as well. Anybody else who might be hanging around, if you have a take on one of these episodes, feel free to throw it in the comments, and I'm sure it'll bump it up to the front of the line, and we'll tackle those. The first one that kind of stands out to me is the back end of the season, and that's mostly because we haven't really talked about these. Some of these other earlier episodes we kind of talked about in very quick snapshot. 5-second conversations early before episodes.
Now there is some things that I have to say before we discuss this.
Yeah, absolutely.
These see it or skip it's aren't necessarily, and this was similar to season 3 of TNG. There's things in episodes that I would maybe consider middle of the road that I feel like are essential viewing because of that aspect. There's things in that episode that may be middle of the road. I'll give an example. I think that's probably everyone's thinking it. Why do you want us to watch Storyteller?
Yeah, that's standing out to me.
Okay, so that's a very middle of the road episode, maybe on the lower end of the spectrum, but that is the first time that Bashir and O'Brien kind of connect, and it is not a very good one. Like, they can't stand each other. Bashir is this really young green officer trying to make friends with the chief, but I think that's essential for that kind of storyline, albeit that the episode isn't very great, but it's an essential episode nonetheless because of that.
So you're factoring in, like, you're kind of looking at this almost like if you were creating a curated, how would you direct somebody to watch DS9 in a shorter version, and so you're taking into account, are there things in this episode that are going to, like, inform things to come that it would be a shame not to have in the back of your mind.
Yes.
So okay,
Yep.
no, that makes perfect sense, and that definitely informs, I think, decisions like the storyteller being a see it. That would be towards the bottom of my personal DS9 like episode rankings for this season for sure. But it's undeniable. I think that's 100% true. I do think there are really key things that it kind of lays the groundwork for with the O'Brien and Bashir relationship, and gives that character arc, the two character arcs, a little extra meat on the bones. I think it can work without it, but I think it's important to see the growth come from a place of these two people don't connect right away, and I think that happens a lot in real life with friends. Sometimes people that you don't necessarily have anything with to begin with, or you might even be antagonistic with, end up becoming best friends over time. Things can happen, and I like that that's there in Deep Space Nine. I like that that's one of the things that they do. So I can totally see that. I get that. One that the two at the back end, I'm curious to talk about just because they're such big, huge. I think they really end the season on a high note and lay the groundwork for what's coming with Duet and In the Hands of the Prophets. They're obviously see it. I'm not incredibly surprised to see that. But do both of those episodes merit their reputations, I guess, in your minds? I mean, in your mind, do you think Duet obviously is like in the upper echelon of Star Trek in general? I think if you ask the general population of Star Trek fans, that's a pretty highly ranked episode for a lot of people. In the Hands of the Prophets is also very well, gets a lot of pub and very acclaimed as well. What was your takeaway for those two?
Yeah, I mean, I loved both the episodes. They both play off the premise of the show very well. They give the characters a lot to do. I am surprised. This is kind of just an overall, thing I noticed. But the Kira character is a lot more prevalent in this early season than I'm remembering. But just her performance in Duet with the guest star was perfect. It was great. I didn't expect the ending the way it ended, but it's because I haven't seen it in a while. But no, it was a great episode. They're both great episodes. I think definitely classics for sure. What's so surprising because I think that it's curious to see such a classic such early on, because if we think back at into TNG, maybe we think of season 2 or 3 as when we see a true classic episode, but to see it in season 1 is incredible. So
I think Duet is probably the especially the 90s shows, the Rick Berman era, the earliest classic. I think the first, you take all those shows in their own right, I think it's the best episode that comes the earliest.
That's maybe not a pilot.
Yeah, true. Discounting the pilot. I think Emissary is a classic. I really love Emissary a lot. Yeah. In the Hands of the Prophets, Rob mentioned something that we were talking about before we went live. Love in the Hands of the Prophets, we get to see how nasty and opportunistic Kai Wynn is. Kai Wynn is definitely a really notable intro in a character that isn't in a ton of Deep Space Nine, but it feels like she is. Like, she does pop in and out. She's, as you're going to find, she's in well over, I'd say, 15 episodes. Beyond that, I would say probably closer to 20, 25. I don't know the exact number, but she's a big presence, and when she's in it, she's usually pretty consequential and very powerful actress. Gives a good performance. Very very nails on a chalkboard. Very distinctive voice to her. What do you think of the introduction of her and Vedic Bareil as well, who we were kind of talking about too? Like, that's the thing about In the Hands of the Prophets. It introduces a lot of characters that are going to play out beyond, and introduce some of those more serialized elements that are going to be a part of Deep Space Nine well into the future.
Yeah, I think it just adds another layer to the Bajorans with Kai Wynn. I think she's as tough as to say. Sorry. It's tough to say this, but she's almost a necessary evil, right? This is a different side of the coin that we see in the Bajorans, right? In my mind, I really feel and empathize with these people. It's interesting to see that side of the coin, where this is a Bajoran that I don't feel bad for. I don't feel for the way that I do maybe other um, Bajorans. But Belial is such a quintessential. When I picture, a religious figure, this charismatic, you know, I don't know. He's like the quintessential guy that I would see. But I like his pairing with Wynn, as tough as that is to say. There we go. I think she's a necessary evil for sure.
No, I totally. I think she's very necessary for the show because I think it really. I think the best thing about that episode and what she offers the show is it gives the Bajorans a really three-dimensional look.
Yeah,
I just think they're not all
yeah.
one thing. Like they don't all view things the same way. There's like we do. Like just look at our country, let alone our planet. There's a divide in how people see things, and there's two different approaches, or there's a lot of different approaches. We have two political parties that kind of drive that conversation, but there's not everybody sees things the same way, and not everybody sees the same solutions for the same problems. And I think Kai Wynn, she's not Kai yet, but Vedic Wynn at this point is representative of that. She has a very different outlook and a different worldview than somebody like Belial does, and it's in conflict with our characters. It happens to be, but Wynn doesn't think she's wrong. Wynn thinks she's right. She thinks she has the correct outlook on things. I never view her as. I agree with you. I don't necessarily sympathize. Like I'm not on board with her view naturally because the show is the perspective of these characters I love, and she's in conflict with them. But I appreciate that she's not just like a sniveling, mustache twirling villain. She doesn't think she's doing anything bad. She's executing her worldview. She's in a position of power, and she has her outlook on how to move forward for Bajor, and she's doing what she can to make that happen. And I think it really adds some dimension to that story, and it needs it because the show's going to hover over it for 7 years. It's not something you can just pop in and then pop out and never look back. It's gonna be there, and it's gonna be a big part of what the show's gonna do. So it needs to be interesting and three-dimensional and multi-layered.
Yeah, and there's some really good things that I'll quote or not quote, just point you to in this episode. The discussion with Cisco and Jake really is relevant today. So I just encourage people to maybe go watch that episode after this show. Just some really good things to take away from that. But I mean, there's other episodes that I'll quote as maybe middle of the road for me at least.
Sure.
But I put it as see it.
Yeah.
The Negus. You got to see it. That's establishing a lot of the Ferengi backstory as well. I'm trying to decide if I just like the Quark character or I like Ferengis in general. That's maybe is it just the performance maybe, or is it just the character? I'm not sure, but I'll definitely keep you guys updated on that. But I think the Negus is an essential viewing because it establishes that backstory a little bit.
Yeah. Totally, yeah. What you just said it kind of summarizes, I think, the struggle that a lot of people. I think Quark is such a beloved character, but a lot of those Ferengi episodes are not necessarily seen with adoring eyes. Some are more successful than others, but the Ferengi episodes tend to be pretty divisive. So that I think that's a pretty common struggle for people. Like, do I just love Quark, or do I love the idea of the Ferengi and how they're executed on screen on a bigger picture? And it'll be interesting to hear as you go through it, and you hit these little Ferengi episodes along the way that really focus on not just Quark but Ferengi culture. How do those episodes land for you? And it's an interesting. Deep Space Nine has all these like interesting sub threads and like little mini series that kind of weave through the show that are interesting to track and keep an eye on. That's definitely one of them. Which other ones would you look at on that list and say maybe a little bit more middle of the road, like maybe C plus territory, but you put a C on it because you felt like it offered something that would pay off later, or lay important groundwork?
Maybe Babel. only the fact that it's doesn't really lay any groundwork, but just because the quarantine aspect was so prevalent in that episode that it kind of hit home.
Sure.
And maybe put that a little bit too high. Um,
No, that one definitely hits home now. I think that
yeah,
there's some scenes in that are really more impactful now than maybe they were a few months ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right. What else? I think past prologue is pretty typically seen as something like. I mean, I put a poll. I didn't not a poll. I put a question out there on Twitter, asking people like which episodes from season 1 do you genuinely love? Like which episodes are real standouts for you? And there are quite a few responses, and there was a pretty wide swath of episodes. Past prologue was mentioned in maybe one or two of them, but mostly you would see Duet, you'd see In the Hands of the Prophets and Emissary, and Captive Pursuit was mentioned quite a few times, and then there was like a spattering of others as well. Like a pretty wide swath of episodes was chosen by somebody, which is pretty consistent with what you find in questions like that. You know.
I like the mini arc in this season with past prologue and I think it's progress.
Yeah.
With where your loyalties lie, and then come back with progress where Cisco like almost trusts her and encourages her to get through this thing. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I that's a really cool observation that there is like this thing that they keep doubling back to where Kira's put in positions to deal with Bajoran issues, Bajoran problems, and is put in these like really uncomfortable positions with having a chain of command to answer to, which she's maybe not used to as much, coming from fighting the Cardassians in a really ragtag like rebel
freedom fighter
kind of environment, and now is in a position where there's some bureaucracy in place, not just even from Starfleet but from the Bajoran government. Like there's it's a whole different world for her. She's dealing with Starfleet, she's dealing with the Bajoran government, and her rank and her position in that in that structure. And yeah, episodes like Past Prologue, episodes like Progress really do put her to the test and put her through the grinder with how she's going to handle those kinds of things. And I think for those reasons, I think Progress I think is really, really good. I think Progress is actually one of the better episodes of the season. There's some really good performances in that.
Yep.
Nana Visitor and I think it's Brian Keith. I think something.
The guest star.
The guest star is extremely good. As this Bajoran elder who doesn't want to move for this
crotchety old guy.
Guy. Yeah, pretty archetypal character that I think we've all seen before, but he really brings a unique voice to it and is powerful and represents, I think. Go ahead. Curious to see what you say. Yeah.
But Kira, just spoiler alert, Kira solved her problem in the most Kira way I could even. Yeah. I couldn't even make it even more Kira. It's just, I love that episode.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love her solution. It is perfectly Kira, perfectly in line with her character, and I think it's correct. Like I think it's true. Like I feel like she sends the message she needs to send, and it's heard. Yeah. I think it feels natural and feels good. So I think Progress is really good. Past Prologue is I think workmanlike. I think it's fine. It's solid. But I think again that would kind of fit in the Storyteller. It's better than the Storyteller, I think. But I think it lays some really important groundwork that I think it would be a shame not to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to have. Captive Pursuit is obviously, I mentioned earlier, that was mentioned a lot in those responses to what episodes do you love. I think we talked about that one a decent bit a few weeks ago when you hit it for the first. At first with this rewatch. I think that's the first time O'Brien really gets to shine on this show, and is
and you realize that these aren't normal crewmen, or normal Starfleet officers, right? They're not going to necessarily. Their heart was in the right place, but they're not necessarily going to follow orders. It's I love to do that. So
yeah, I think it's a really good episode too that successfully makes it known that these characters are different, that we're in a different place. This is not the Enterprise D on the flagship with Captain Picard, setting his tone. Like this is very different situation that we're in. And I think I love the mysteriousness of the First Contact. Like, I think they do a really good job of conveying that kind of awe. Like, holy crap, these people are from the Gamma Quadrant. Like, it's the first time we meet anybody from the Gamma Quadrant, aside from the wormhole, the Prophets, the wormhole aliens. I think Tosk, as Rob's mentioning right now in the chat, great character, really memorable. One of my earliest memories of Star Trek in general, I think, actually, watching that episode air. I think that's one of a standout memory that I can like remember where I was watching that and thinking it was cool when I was like 6 years old. So yeah, Captain Pursuit's a great one. Which other ones stand out to me? If Wishes Were Horses, we kind of talked about a little bit. Let's kind of go into some skip-its. What stands out to you? What do you want to talk about? Like what pops out in your mind as a?
Well, let me just after Captain Pursuit, it kind of gets a little rocky for me.
Yeah,
even
true.
with the see-its as well. I don't like when past guest stars come on. Q-less, the sort of Forsaken. I really want, Deep Space Nine to stand on its own. So that's why that's skip it. So I mean, even take 7 to even. I think maybe 12 could maybe flip to the, skip it category, because Vortex, why I have Vortex on there is just because there's some little bit of Odo's backstory, and I wanted to throw Odo some love with that. But I think that, 4 or 5 episode run there is a little rocky mid-season. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I
do have... Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that does stand out, the kind of run of skip-its there. And I would agree with it. I think I'm a little higher on Dax. I don't know. I've never really done this see it, skip it thing myself, like just a pure thumbs up, thumbs down. It makes me curious to try that. But Dax would kind of be one of those episodes that's kind of in the middle for me. Like I think it tries to do some backstory stuff for Dax, but I don't know how impactful it really is, and I don't know how much it's consequential for the character moving forward. And yeah, I think it's certainly anomalous in the way that it presents Dax. Dax is so, not. She's kind of laying back and letting the process play out, and doesn't want to out.
She's really closed off.
Very closed off. Just shuts down, and that's so counter to what Dax does in the future. I can't imagine Jadzia Dax in season 5 or 6 or 4. Taking that laying down as much, and like you said, I think there's some good headcanon. Yeah. There's a good headcanon explanation for that, and I can get down with that. She has very recently joined, and as we see with Ezri in season 7 down the road, like that's a tumultuous process that takes time to like settle, and I can totally get that, and I can accept it on those grounds for sure. But I do think the episode kind of just lays there at times. Like it's not a grabber for sure. Q-less I would agree with. I think that's a misfire with it's kind of a misfire in the sense that in reintroducing old TNG characters, and I think kind of transparently trying to like appeal to TNG viewers and try to bring people over, and I don't think it's entirely successful. And the Forsaken's an interesting one that I think is actually kind of divisive.
Could have been. It was a tough cut for me. It was a tough cut, for sure.
Because I think I'm mixed on it too, and I've kind of changed my view of it over the years. I used to not care for it at all, but I do think that scene in the turbo lift with Odo and Lwaxana is kind of important for Odo's growth. He kind of lets his hair down a little bit, and
he puts his guard down, definitely.
Yeah, and up at this point in Deep Space Nine, you really don't see that much. He's very, very rigid and all business and a very tough nut to crack. And I think it's interesting that Lwaxana Troi, of all people, is kind of the person that gets him to kind of accept himself a little bit and not. Yeah, I think that it's I think a lot of it rides on your appreciation of that character. I think if you're on the positive side of Lwaxana Troi and TNG, you're probably more apt to be on the positive side of this episode. I think Rob mentioned even in that question I asked, which episodes do you really love from this season? I think he cited The Forsaken, so I'm sure that one maybe sticks out to him. And I could be wrong
Yeah.
about that, Rob, if you're still hanging in there. If you didn't, I'm sorry for putting words in your mouth. But I feel like I remember you saying you really liked that episode. But I think that and Q-List kind of go hand in hand in the sense of bringing old TNG, like, recurring characters back into the fold. And I think the Forsaken's a little better at it than Q-List is, but your mileage may vary depending on how you feel about that character. Interesting. Yeah, we kind of talked about Vortex. I agree with you there. I think it's kind of a ho-hum, middle of the road, but I think there's some important Odo backstory in there. Penske File mentions with Dax doubling back to Dax. Dax somehow takes the Dax character and somehow doesn't make her the lead character in the episode, which is kind of true.
Yeah.
The episode's called Dax, and it's about her, but she's so in the background because of her, lack of engagement with the proceeding. Yeah, I think. No, I'm interested to talk about Battle Lines. Is an episode that I kind of like a lot. Actually, that's the episode with Kaiopaka being killed off, and a very dark, very grim episode. Jonathan Banks of Breaking Bad fame is in that as one of the aliens on that planet. I think he's an Emmy winner for Breaking Bad. Maybe I could be wrong about that. Or Better Call Saul, whichever one he maybe won for. But that's a really dark, grim episode. That's an episode that would benefit greatly from an HD remaster because of how darkly shot it is. I feel like you have that in the See It column. What do you remember there? Was that an easy call? See It for sure, or was that a more fringy? Could have gone either way.
It was tough. Just I feel like I put it in there because it has some Bajoran backstory stuff in it. It also has, I'm not sure. That might be one of the first times that we go to the Gamma Quadrant. It has some good wormhole stuff, I think. But it kind of echoed some like TOS vibes a little bit, where like I feel like this. I don't know. It just had some like old. You know how like it's sometimes in TOS like they find this old alien race that they destroyed each other and so the kind of had echoes of TOS there with like the morality play of like this endless war, and this hatred, which I think is really there's some similarities I think with not there's some hatred I think similarities with not apples to apples, but maybe apples to oranges with the Bajorans and the Cardassians, where there's this deep hatred, and I found it interesting that this Kai was going to stay and kind of attempt to kind of
forge the peace.
Yeah. That's why it was on there. It's definitely I think middle of the road for me. But I think that there was enough in there that I was like, you know what, I think I'd see it, make it see it. So
yeah, I think it's a see it. I think it's one of the better outings. I don't know that it's like a great Deep Space Nine classic by any means, but I think in the scope of Deep Space Nine's first season, I think it's a pretty successful episode. And I think it does lay some interesting groundwork for Kira. I think she gets to play some interesting scenes there, and her Opaka being kind of presented as this really revered leader who is really critical to the Bajoran recovery and being taken away with such a it's very unexpected. I feel like if you stay away from it for a long time and you double back and you're not sure how it's all going to play out, I was like, the shuttle crashes and she's dead. Like that's just like that. That's a big play. And to bring her back to life through these science fiction plot mechanics for the episode reasons, and then not be able to take her back, and she's going to live on this planet forever, is kind of a bold. It's just I think it's a cool episode. I really like Battle Lines. It's grown on me a lot over the years. I like how dark it is, and I think, like you said, the echoes of the struggle that the Bajorans are feeling toward the Cardassians is certainly intentional.
I've got some facts or some statistics here. Last time we did this was TOS season 3.
Yeah.
Some interesting stuff there. I had 10 skip-its and 14 see-its for season 3 of TOS. which you guys know I'm very positive on most Trek. So, but for Deep Space Nine, I had 8 skip-its and 12 Cs. A little bit different because the episode or the seasons are not exactly the same. One's 24, one's 20 in length. But again, I think it's more. Those show that I am just more positive on Trek, even if it's like an episode, say the Nagus or Vortex. I can find something that I think that is maybe gives the episode a see it marking, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what I hope you guys can take away from this, is that even if the episode is middle of the road or not very good, there's still things make it worth watching.
Yeah,
because that is Star Trek in a nutshell, right? That's why I think it's so rewatchable. Is not many other reasons, obviously, but it's because that even the worst of episodes or the worst quoted seasons, maybe with season 3 of TOS, but even then, there's still reasons to watch.
There are things in there, yeah. Even in episodes that don't necessarily work, there are, fun things to take away and fun things to chew on. I totally echo that. It's certainly what keeps me rewatching it. Even episodes that I don't, adore or don't think are perfect, or I don't think hardly any episode is perfect, but even episodes that I don't think are like resounding successes across the board, I enjoy watching them for, this reason or that. There's a very small handful that I would, say are like struggles every time to get through. But for the most part, I echo everything you just said, for sure. So the poll question that I kind of threw out there earlier in the week when we rolled out this topic, I think on Friday, was of the 90s era, Rick Berman era Star Trek shows, which first season is the most successful in your mind? TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise. And it's tough. It's difficult because TNG and Enterprise are full-fledged, like 26 episode seasons. DS9's is 20, Voyager's 16. Very close to almost like a Discovery season. So the lengths kind of make it difficult to compare, I think, if you're going like statistical. But where do you, like, what's your gut say? Because you've recently, in the last, like, since we've been doing Trek Live, you've rewatched all those shows. So they're all pretty recent. You've seen all these shows, all these seasons more than once, at least. What pops into your head if you think about that?
Thinking back, it's this season is definitely stronger, I think, because I'm kind of basing this. I think TNG really struggles. I think in season 1 at times, and so I think I would say the top 2 or 3, maybe in the Berman era Trek, I would say this would fall for Deep Space Nine. We're not talking about TOS here, but I think I maybe put TOS above there.
Sure. Me too.
Maybe, a few others, but that's an interesting thought. I think my gut wants to say, maybe it is the greatest season 1 in the Berman era, but could be wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I only hesitate just because Voyager is like
you have a soft spot.
Butt heads a little bit, but I'm trying to set that aside and try to look at this question objectively. So
yeah, I think I could go in a couple different directions. I think when I asked the question, there's 133 votes on it right now. The poll's still open. Deep Space Nine's leading with 36%, so not like a resounding majority or anything. Voyager 31, 32%. Then Enterprise 19, Next Generation 13.5. So nothing's completely running away with it. Deep Space Nine is leading. Interesting to just get a sample size of what people might think.
Yeah.
But no, if for me, I might say Voyager actually. I think there's some misfires there, and but not terribly many. I think it's definitely skewed maybe by the less episodes. But I think of that season, and I think obviously Caretaker is a very successful in my eyes. I love Eye of the Needle. I love Jatrell. I really like Phage. Heroes and Demons is fun. Like State of Flux. Like there's a pretty reasonable run of pretty solid episodes.
The difference, I think, is there a duet in there?
No, there's not, and that's
No,
if you want to think that for sure. If you
but
weigh
if you
that.
look, on the other side of the coin, the episodes are, there's less. I don't know, move along homes in.
Yeah, exactly.
People could say that maybe move along home isn't as bad as people say, but there's not as many of those in that season, maybe.
Yeah,
but it's hard because it's 16 episodes, right?
It's 16 episodes. There isn't. I don't know that there's a move along home in the sense of like having like iconically. And Rob even I think mentioned he would have put Move Along Home in the See It column, and I think you would find that with some people. Move Along Home kind of fits in the. I think it's kind of like a long lost cousin of like Spock's Brain almost, in the sense that it's so campy and so silly, and it's so like infamous at this point that people kind of gravitate to it and they find reasons to love it for its faults. It's a fun drinking episode. It's a fun hangout episode. That kind of thing. Like it's got its appeal on that level with the corniness and the over the topness. So it doesn't have anything like that glaring in it. It doesn't have anything like Duet or maybe even like In the Hands of the Prophets. I don't know that there's an episode in Voyager's first season that is as good as either one of those in Deep Space Nine. Yeah, but I think they're. I don't know. It's an interesting. You could go around in circles forever with.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. However you want to define it. If I think you kind of dropped the mic a little bit with, well, DS9 season 1 is Duet, which is maybe a top 25 episode of Star Trek holistically of everything, which I think really does lift it. If you want to view it through that lens, like is it lifted through a real classic? So it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't think there's a definitive answer. I don't think there's a real correct answer. There's your answer. There's your personal preference for sure that you can hold and share. But there's no scientific method to determining what the true answer is. Trekkie Rob says that Jatrell might be the closest to Duet, but not quite as good. I would agree with that. Jatrell is probably the episode from Voyager's first season that edges closest to like that classic territory. I don't think it quite maybe gets there for me personally, but it's edging into that territory. Rob says he thinks he chose Enterprise. Penske File said Enterprise, which is interesting. I wouldn't have expected that from people. Enterprise does have Shuttlepod 1, which I think is a great episode. I think Dear Doctor is divisive and brings some fire out of people, but depending on how you fall on that one, some people view that as a classic. But yeah, it's interesting thing to ponder for sure. And yeah, I don't have much else to say. I think we covered pretty much all the episodes. We may have missed one or two, but
speaking of Shuttlepod 1, what are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're going to talk about shuttles. We were going to do that a couple weeks ago. That was our sort of lost episode. We're going to double back and talk Star Trek shuttles, favorite shuttles, everything shuttles. It's going to be a very relaxed, laid back.
Yep.
I don't even know where it's going to go. Or we're just kind of going into a conversation prepared to talk about shuttles, and we'll see where it takes us. Lots of shuttles to choose from, different ways shows use shuttles. Yeah, looking forward to it though. It's gonna be cool. Much less structured, much less like on a mission to talk about episodes like this was, or even last week with the fantasy draft. So, if Star Trek shuttles are your thing, if you like talking about Star Trek shuttles, next Sunday is gonna be the place to be.
Before we wrap up the topic and we sign off, Bill and I are gonna post the empty seat or skip-its for season 1 of Deep Space Nine. I'd love to see your guys's. I'm gonna collect them, and maybe we can at the end of the series we can do all the data and analytics and stuff that
Sure.
Bill and I sometimes like to do. So yeah, I'd love to see your guys' lists for season 1. I think we're gonna keep doing this. Um, I really like doing this. It's easier for me than ranking it.
Hmm.
If that um makes any sense, but
Makes
it's
a
gonna
lot
be
of
fun
sense.
to go through a whole series, and then kind of. I think this is gonna be the thing that pushes me over to to rewatch number 3, which I'm getting close, not close to. I still have to go through Deep Space Nine, but I think to be able to have this data to compare when I go back through, Voyager and TNG and Enterprise and the whole gamut of stuff, I think will be really really fun to compare and to see. So
Yeah, I think the see it skip it is certainly, it's not a revolutionary idea, but it's a great way to do it. I
no,
think it's I think Trek Geeks does something. I think they do see it skip it. It kind of stems from all the way back to like Siskel and Ebert with thumbs up, thumbs down. Like, is it a movie? Whether it's a movie or an episode, like, is it thumbs up or thumbs down? Like, simple. Not getting too into the
yep.
weeds with 3 stars against the 4 stars ranking, which is all those things are fun, and we love doing all those things. I've done pretty much all of it over the years. Tried all of it, but like I said earlier in this episode, I've never quite approached it with like just a flat thumbs up, thumbs down. So I agree. I would love to continue to, through the lens of your rewatch, especially look at, have you do this, and then it kind of forces me to put the shoe on that, put your shoe on my foot, and try to look at the episodes that way too. It's a different way to look at it. So yeah, it's a fun conversation to have. And if it's the most interesting way for you to kind of look at the episodes and kind of put it all into perspective for yourself, then that's the way you should do it, and that's the way I'm interested in hearing you frame your takes and your summaries of as you're rewatching. So yeah, we'll definitely be doubling back to this. We've done 2 now. As we go through your seasons, as you keep moving forward, we'll keep doubling back to this.
Yep.
It's going to be in our recurring run of topics.
Yes.
So yeah, looking forward to future conversations like this. DS9 season 2 will be up in a handful of weeks, whenever it comes. And yeah, cool.
Yep.
Anything else you want to share? Podcasts? Anything?
I don't have anything prepared.
We'll shout out, since they're in the room. Penske File is in the process of putting out. They're doing their reviews of Enterprise season 1. You should definitely go ahead and check them out. The long running show, looking at episodes of Star Trek. Trekkie Rob with the Star Trek Book Club is always a good follow. Lots of good discussion there. Cool way to get involved with other fans. And I'll also shout out Rob as well. I was there yesterday. Keep an eye on his Twitter feed. He does pub quizzes. He does watch parties. Yesterday there was a quiz that he hosted. That was a really good time. So in this, we're still kind of in a pseudo quarantine. If you're looking for ways to engage with Star Trek fans, there are all kinds of ways to do it in the form of things like this. Live streams, YouTube podcasts, things like that. And then there's even more personal, intimate things you could do, like the things Rob hosts, and Trek After Dark, which we host every once in a while too. So keep an eye on our Twitter handles, and we'll keep you posted on when we do those. When we'll do that again. Every so often we'll host a very casual hangout in our Discord server. So again, lots of cool ways to hang out with Star Trek fans out there, and a lot of people need that these days. So
That's right.
cool.
Yep.
All right, so I think that's going to do it. Like we mentioned a couple minutes ago, we'll be back next week with a conversation about Star Trek Shuttlecraft and everything that, whatever that brings along with it, whatever that entails. We're not sure. It's going to be, like I said, very casual, open-ended conversation, and yeah, looking forward to it. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've got a bone to pick with the shuttle community or whatever. It should be made for a fun discussion.
So there's some things to talk about, like what constitutes a shuttle, and what certain things count as. Is it a little starship or is it a shuttle? A lot of interesting things to just kind of chew on and toss around as a conversation. So should be fun. Next Sunday, 10 o'clock, same time. You can find us again if you're watching this now. The folks that are in the chat obviously figured it out, but I'll do my whole spiel like I did at the top of the show. If you're finding us on our Twitter, on my Twitter feed. You can click the Periscope link that is in the tweet, and it'll take you to our actual Periscope live stream where you can log in with your Twitter account. You don't need to make a new account. You don't need to sign up to anything on Periscope.
Nope.
It's linked to Twitter. It's two quick clicks, and then you're in, and you can comment the way that Rob Penske File and Fitzy Calherb, who is also in the room, and we appreciate stopping by. Welcome.
Yeah.
Are in the room and chatting away, and I see other people popping in and out too throughout the stream. But you can comment, you can kind of help steer the conversation by doing that. So everybody's encouraged to do that as well. And lastly, I'll end by saying that in the coming days, you'll find this on YouTube as well. Our YouTube channel is still alive and well. We're housing all of our recordings there. We're not live streaming there currently. We're just doing it here on Periscope for now, and probably for the foreseeable future. But our full library is pretty much there, and this episode will end up there in a couple of days as well. So you can always check that out, and we encourage you to subscribe there as well. Okay. Anything else?
Yep. Sounds good.
All right. No, that's going to do it.
Yep.
And we'll see everybody next week.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone.